So today's topic is, like I said, forced longitudinal flexion. And very unfortunately, we see this in about 90% of our riders and trainers in the world today. So the first most common training uh, issue that I see with forced longitudinal flexion is holding the horse behind the vertical line. And the purpose or the intention behind that is that the person, the rider, the trainer, is trying to put the horse into a round position, trying to keep him on the bit and giving him that silhouette that is considered ideal. And we've unfortunately especially our competitors have taken this to a very extreme they've taken it to the extreme, and now what we're seeing is people that are held are considered to be very good riders, and we see this in our Olympians, is that they're holding the horse back behind the vertical, and that creates this big arch in the horse's neck. But if you notice, the nose is being held back. Now in the Olympic, I encourage you to go and look up like, for example, 2016 Olympic dressage riders on YouTube, and just watch several of them and notice where the nose of the horse is. And in most cases, you'll see it's about 50 to maybe 60% of the time that the horse is brought behind the vertical during those rides, and that happens frequently. And that's because the horse he's not developed and he can't hold himself up. But the other part of that is that the rider is actually putting him in that position. So this happens when the rider has a misunderstanding of the horse being on the bit or being round. I've interviewed riders who ride like this, and many have told me that the roundness comes from how the horse holds his head with his neck and uses his shoulders. Well, this is completely incorrect, because the horse can never be round when being held behind the vertical. And most importantly, a rider who focuses on the horse's head and shoulders will never achieve true roundness that supports the balance through the horse's body. This is because the rider's thought process about achieving the look of the horse while in motion is misunderstood. Because if the rider has this notion that you're putting the horse into this position, then there's no understanding that actually what actually has to happen is the horse finds balance by putting his head where it belongs, which is on the vertical. So before I go further, I want to point out that roundness being on the bit or on the vertical in the horse is not something that is made to happen by the rider, just like I was saying. It's the result of proper development in the horse's back and haunches. So what we need is to develop the horse's haunches, and so that he can develop his back, so that he can move properly in his front end. And when that all comes into play, the result is that he's able to hold himself up and in a round position on the vertical. The nose is actually very slightly out, and the more skilled you become as a rider, the less pointed it will be, the less pointed outward it will be, and because you can help through the way that you are balanced, and you're soft as well, that you can help the horse balance himself even more and hold himself up. So it's about how the horse is holding himself, and about how well you're encouraging him to move forward and to use the proper parts of his body. But none of that can happen if the horse does not first have the proper muscling throughout his body to be able to be balanced and to move correctly, even without a rider, because the horse needs to develop his top line. And unfortunately, with all of the forced longitudinal flexion that we see, all of these horses, they're developing all their ventral chain muscles. So everything that's underneath the horse, everything we don't want to be developed and strong, that we want to be relaxed, is overdeveloped, because the horse he's pulling his head in, and he has to figure out how to balance himself and then pull himself forward. And that is it's sort of funny, because the trainers, the people that I've interviewed, they realize that what they're doing actually it's coming from the shoulders. So the horse, because the horse is in this weird position, and he's got his neck tensed, and that's trickling down through all of his underlying muscles, that now he has to really put a lot of force into pulling himself forward with his shoulders, because now his back's down, and he's completely disconnected from behind, and his hind legs are trailing out behind him. So yes, the front end is working a lot, and way more than what we want, because that causes the horse's vertebra to begin to close and to rub, causes the pulling at C1 and C2, causes a lot of pressure here on the mouth, and then it also causes pressure in the lumbar vertebra, because that becomes locked. And if you do any jumping and you're riding your horse like this on the flat, you ask your horse to jump hollow, which is what we call it when the back is down, you're going to cause what's called a hunter's bump, because now the horse doesn't have the support he needs to be able to keep his pelvis in place, because the pelvis is kept in place by the psoas muscles, and among other muscles, but the psoas are very important to be strong. They're very deep muscles that attach to the pelvis, and the only way we can work those deep muscles is by asking the horse to work over his back, to round his back, which you've heard me talk about a lot, and to work truly from behind, and to connect his haunches from behind. But we can only do that when we start the horse from the ground at developing his muscles over his back. And we can never, ever ask the horse to do that by just getting on his back. The result of good horse care and good horse training is being able to ride in harmony and being able to ride. But there's many steps to getting to that point beforehand, which we are in such a rushed society that we don't want to spend the money, or we don't want to spend the time, and then we create all of these problems for ourselves. So we put our horses down too early because we're asking them to do too much too early. We injure ourselves, or in some cases, unfortunately, people get killed because they don't take the time to understand what the development of the horse really is, and what steps need to be taken to avoid these issues. So it's extremely important to understand what are the steps that need to be taken to develop your horse properly, to avoid forced longitudinal flexion. Now, I would say this is probably the most prominent issue that we have in today's training and riding scene, because we don't have the foundational training that we need in our equestrian world. So please be that rider that takes the time to learn the development of the horse, to give yourself the time to develop yourself and become more self-aware, so that you can help your horse avoid injury, early death, and also avoid injury to yourself, and not to cause your horse to live in these kinds of in this kind of pain every day. It's not difficult. The exercises that we can do for our horses are not difficult. It just takes a little bit more time than perhaps jumping on and trying to go riding on the trail one day, and then the next week you don't do anything with your horse. This is about consistency. This is about understanding what steps need to be taken, and really having concern for your horse.